we're getting to the mini debate here. Which is the better film, Terminator 1 or Terminator 2? Again, they are both really good, but we're
I,
divided on
I
this.
I feel like it might just be best for like you to make your case and me to make my case and
Yeah,
leave it at that, because like I don't want to say anything bad about Terminator 1 just because I think Terminator 2 is in the end the better film,
yeah.
and that's not what we're here for.
Okay, so I think Terminator 1 is better because it's basically the hero's tale. We're meant to identify with the everyman, or the everywoman in this case, Sarah Connor, and it's not really a mindless action movie so much. It's good. It's also a love story. It's got a little bit of that, hey, wait a minute, time travel, how is this supposed to work? If it's got a grandfather paradox in it that makes you think. The villain is cold and calculating, and you know what he wants to do. And Terminator 2, in comparison, it has Arnold, and he's doing a highlight reel with his one-liners. Um, None of the main guys in the Terminator 2 is the everyman. Like Sarah Connor is no, we can't readily identify her with her anymore because she's like
Mm-hmm.
now the superhero.
Okay, that's a
Um,
good point. That's a good point.
yeah, and
Kyle
John
Reese
Connor.
is like
What were we
Sarah
saying?
Con. Well, in Terminator 1, Sarah Connor is an ordinary woman, and
Right.
Kyle Reese is an ordinarily powered, like abled man. He's just a regular guy.
Yeah, and also like John's not a normal kid either
Yeah.
that we can readily identify with. I think maybe in your case, when you saw it when you were 12, maybe you were more easily able to identify with him because you were of similar age, right?
It could be.
And so
He's
now nostalgia is making you think that it was better because you identified with him more, right?
that might be like John Connor in Terminator 2. He kind of fits into this trope of like the sassy, wisecracking kid, which you see all through the 80s.
Yeah.
Films like the Goonies or Stand by Me or It, or
Hmm.
like every Steven Spielberg film in the 80s has Jurassic Park. There's wisecracking kids everywhere.
Okay. Another thing I'd like to bring up is that Terminator 2 has way better CG effects, but that might actually be to its detriment because in Terminator 1 we have a villain that is tangible and is believable. You can
Mm-hmm.
conceivably make a robot and it can conceivably be programmed to kill you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Terminator 2 has this magical shape-shifting machine that can take any form and do whatever, and that's so advanced that it's hard to suspend
It's harder
your
to suspend
disbelief.
disbelief.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's
Like,
why it feels like we're more in a fantasy story here, and
see, I would say like in Terminator 3, Rise of the Machine, where this Terminator can like her arm can turn into a dozen different weapons. I would say we're getting into that area, but
mhm,
like in this one, they put special attention into the T1000's limitations, right?
okay,
Like he freezes. He can only turn into stabbing objects, which also means that he has to get up close,
right. But I
right?
mean,
So,
like,
like I would say the T1000 has more limitations and has to do more problem solving than future Terminators and future movies.
yeah, I would agree with you there, but at the same time, there has to be a massive technological leap. I mean, where is the CPU even
It's
contained
true.
in the
It's true.
T1000?
It's true. The C1000 is a monstrous technological leap ahead of the T800.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
we
true.
could conceivably build the T800 in like probably 30 or 40 years,
Yeah,
but the T1000, it's like where would you even house the CPU?
yeah.
It's even hard. I can't figure that. I don't know. It's that just
Well,
like
we
kind
could
of
build a
takes
T
you out of the.
we could build
Yeah,
a T800 now if we had the miniaturization and the power source. Like the power source is the
yeah,
problem right now. But
yeah,
anyway,
yeah, yeah. But yeah, basically, I mean, it's basically like Terminator 1 is the hero's journey, much like
yeah.
Star Wars, much like
Okay.
every other movie we've seen. And you identify easily with Sarah, and you can see yourself
So
in
Sarah's
all
the
of those
hero
situations.
in this myth.
Yeah, well, if you combine them, both of them together, yes, she is. But
Okay.
it's the
Like you
beginning of
say
her journey,
hero's
and
journey, so you're talking about who's on the hero's journey.
Sarah is
Sarah.
definitely.
Okay, just to be clear. All right.
Yeah. But I mean, I suppose John is too, the big thing about that is reluctance.
Now, John is a
And
coming of age story, not a hero's journey.
okay, all right, I can see that. But anyway, just I find that Terminator 1, it's also like kind of a slasher movie, and it just thematically it works really well.
It
It's
does
just
such a good job
great
of
and
mashing
perfect.
together genres.
But how about you, Rob? Why do you think Terminator 2 is better?
Well, first of all, I think I think without Terminator 2, like I really think that Terminator 2 makes Terminator 1 better. Um,
I can see
where
that.
like if Terminator 1 had just existed by itself and there hadn't been a Terminator 2, it would have been a above average or maybe great 80s action movie.
Yeah.
But it was still very much an 80s action movie. It has a lot of the tropes of an 80s action movie: the male hero, the female, the damsel in distress,
Hmm.
the cat and mouse game, chase scenes, uh, and cheesy 80s synth music to underscore the whole thing.
Yeah. So it would be, but it
Okay.
wouldn't be like Beastmaster, right? It would
But
be
no, it wouldn't be like it would be we would be talking about it the way that we talk about
what,
um
Rambo,
not Die Hard, but something like not one
Predator.
that had sequels, right? Not one that had sequels, but like Romancing the Stone,
Okay.
right? Like a very good 80s action movie, and that's it. How
Okay.
nice.
All right.
Okay.
No, I can agree
Um
with that. Yeah, definitely the lore from two makes one that much more important. Kind of like how Empire Strikes Back elevates A New Hope.
Perfect example. Perfect
Yeah.
example. Empire Strikes Back made Star Wars better
Yeah.
because it was so good and it added complexity and layers, even looking back onto Star Wars. Okay.
Yeah.
um the other thing is, like, you could criticize it for being cheesy, but the fact is, like, I almost want to use the word iconography when we talk
Hmm.
about the way that Arnold Schwarzenegger is framed and portrayed in Terminator 2.
Yeah.
Terminator 1, he gets, as you said, he gets very, like, surprisingly small amount of screen time for being the most memorable thing about that film to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Okay. Terminator 2 is where we saw Arnold Schwarzenegger in a black leather jacket, right? In the first one, he was wearing like that gray thing. It's
Yeah.
it's where we saw him
The punk
on
clothes.
Arnold Schwarzenegger in a black leather jacket on a motorbike with the sunglasses. Like, that's where the myth of Arnold Schwarzenegger all came together and
Hmm.
launched him into the pantheon of action heroes in a way that other superstars of the 80s didn't quite get.
Right.
Okay. um the mano a mano duel of, one super robot against another super robot is cool. The film's storytelling, the pacing is just impeccable. And the other thing about Terminator 2 is that Terminator 1 doesn't really have a cohesive, overarching thematic element that makes you, like, really sits in your head when you finish it, whereas Terminator 2 does.
Can you explain that more? I
Well,
thought about Terminator 1 a lot after I finished it.
but were you thinking about the ideas, or were you thinking about, like, the time travel mechanics?
Well, kind of both. But I was like, oh, well, this evil corporation, instead of going to authorities, decided to keep things under wraps, and that's the reason that led to the downfall of human civilization is the greed of that corporation, Cyberdyne. That's what I came away with it from.
Okay, so a
But again,
critique of corporate greed.
I saw these out of order, so I might be influenced by Terminator 2 when I'm saying that.
Okay, because, like, to me, what I see when I watch Terminator 2, like, there's a coming of age story for John Connor. There
Hmm.
is, and in a weird way, there's also a coming of age story for the Terminator, for Uncle Bob, because he
Yeah.
learns not to kill. He learns to value human life, right?
Or
And
he convinces you that he learns that
he
anyway.
can, well, they even turn on the learning switch, right?
Yes.
They, like, the idea that even a robot, and this is, I mean, okay, it's James Cameron, so he's a little heavy-handed with his thematic elements, as James Cameron always is.
Yeah.
But, like, basically, Sarah Connor lays out all of the thematic elements in voiceover at the end of the movie.
Yeah. And
Okay.
at the
And
beginning too.
at the beginning and also in the middle when she's watching, when she's watching John with the Terminator, and
They're
she's saying
playing
like
what? Give
he's
me five.
playing, yeah, and she's going, he's the one who will never leave, who will never betray him, who will never lie to him, who will always protect him, right? And that's a deep human impulse, that desire for a father or a caretaker,
Yeah,
or
yeah, I can
something.
see
And
that.
especially for John, who didn't have a father figure, right? Like that
Yeah,
that weird thing between, that father son thing, that brings a motif into the story where, in a way, John is the father of the Terminator, because he's teaching him how to talk, and he's teaching him how to act and stuff. But in another way, the Terminator is giving John that secure, safe place that a kid needs.
I have a lot of
So,
male friends who say at the end of Terminator 2, when he lowers himself into the molten steel, they started bawling.
oh
At
yeah,
that point,
right,
I
like
didn't.
you're saying goodbye, that's a father figure goodbye scene, right? And
I think I saw that as an unfeeling robot just expiring. And maybe I'm heartless, but I can understand why people were bawling, but that I did not have that reaction.
like I have a feeling it seems like part of this is that I'm guessing here, but it seems to me from what I've heard so far that you are kind of unconvinced by Edward Furlong's performance as John Connor. And it might be that the
Mm.
emotions that John Connor is showing just kind of didn't hit you, perhaps because of that, because you were sitting there going, hey, this is an annoying kid, instead of going, hey man, wouldn't it be cool if I had a giant friend who always kept me safe, the way
Well,
that
again,
the way that I
that
did when I was 14 when I watched the show. Now,
yeah, I think that that has to do with the age that we first saw it at,
that could well be,
perhaps.
right? That could
Yeah.
well be. But
Hmm.
I think even without that nostalgia mixing in, the iconography of giving Arnold Schwarzenegger that hero's gaze,
Yeah,
that the iconic looks, the iconic lines, like that was when Arnold Schwarzenegger became Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know?
absolutely. And that's what
Um,
led to all of the cheesy 90s Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, that performance.
well, as I said before, man, you can't blame Rage Against the Machine for Limp Bizkit.
Yeah, so we're not going
Okay,
to blame Terminator 2 for Kindergarten Cop
you
or
can't, right?
or
But
Twins. Well, Twins wasn't that bad actually, but yeah.
but you can't play against type until you have an iconic type. And
Yeah,
Arnold's type was so iconic. He had room to play against it in six different movies, because
yeah.
that iconic image was so powerful. And that iconic image is because of Terminator 2 more than any other single film.
Yeah, I think there must have been a time in the early 90s where Arnold was like on top of everything in every genre, right?
Yeah, like he was untouchable. He was like, during the 80s it was, hey man, who you got, Arnold or Sylvester? The same way that it was like Michael Jackson or Prince, or like
Yeah,
Arnold versus Sly was another one of those. But in the 90s,
no competition.
Schwarzenegger
Yeah,
put the competition behind him,
absolutely.
absolutely. So there's that. I think, and add to that the fact that, yeah, it was heavy-handed, but the film really did try to put something in your head to make you think about, some serious, meaningful themes about what is life, and enjoying life, the preciousness of life,
Or
that
even more, what it even means to be human.
what it means to be human, right? And a robot is exploring that, but at the same time, an embittered, kind of traumatized woman is rediscovering
Yeah,
her humanity through an inhuman creature learning about human behavior. So, like, there are those kinds of dynamics make Terminator 2 a really thematically rich film. And I would even, I think I'm going to go out on a limb and say, probably the most thematically rich film James Cameron has ever directed.
Wow. Well, what else has he done? Like Titanic and
his other
Aliens.
his other films, Aliens, like Avatar was his other
Yeah,
attempt at like creating a really strong thematic message, and it was so cloying and heavy-handed that it
right,
became
right.
it became the butt of jokes, right? It was like, oh yeah, it's Pocahontas and Smurfs, and right? But Terminator 2 was the only time James Cameron tried to introduce a strong thematic element to a film and nailed it without going so far over the top that it became silly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would say the same about Terminator 1, but I guess, I mean, I think Terminator 2, like you said, it does elevate the reputation of Terminator 1, definitely. But it's just there's something about it that like I said, like you can identify with Sarah more easily, and like there's so much more left to mystery. I mean, those kinds of things just
I think
it makes it really good.
that's one thing about Terminator 1 that you are absolutely right that it totally holds over Terminator 2 is that like you get about an hour into the film before you piece together the whole this is what's going on,
Yeah,
right?
also if
And
you have
that slow drip of information makes it interesting in a very different way of who knows what and when do they know it.
yeah, if you had not even seen Terminator 1, any previews going into it, and you had no idea who Arnold Schwarzenegger was, never heard of Terminator before, you can't tell who's the good guy until halfway through the movie,
Mm-hmm.
which that's pretty cool. They tried to do the same thing in Terminator 2 because you're like, oh, it's the Terminator. He's back. He must be the evil one. But you know right away that he's the good guy from previews, right? So,
Yeah, from previews. Although like that switch in the hallway, the reversal in the hallway is that's a pretty cool. That's a pretty cool.
yeah,
And that's
definitely.
that's the other thing about about Terminator 2 is the chase scenes in Terminator 2 are
Oh,
like
they're amazing.
they're like they're probably I'm sure they're taught in film school as here is how to make an effing chase scene.
Yeah,
Um,
and also I get a sense also from Terminator 2 that the stakes seem to be higher in
mhm.
some cases, even though the stakes are essentially equal if you look at them on paper. In Terminator 2, they definitely seem like, oh, if something goes wrong here, everything is lost,
Well,
right?
it's like Godzilla versus humans compared to Godzilla versus Mothra, right?
Yeah.
Like super robot versus humans is a different type of story than
Hmm.
super robot versus another super robot.
Yeah, well, that's one thing I like to say about Terminator 1 is it's essentially a B slasher movie, a B
Mhm.
movie slasher film that is punching way above its weight. And that's
That's a
that's
really
why I
good
think
way to
it's awesome.
describe it. That's a really good
Yeah.
way to describe it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll
But
co-sign that assessment.
but
So
I do agree that they're both great movies.
yeah, and that's like those are my reasons for loving Terminator 2, but really there's just a very a little bit of oxygen between the two films, and you know
And
um
maybe it's also that I just enjoy that the fact that it's so obviously set in the 80s because I like 80s movies. That could be
okay,
something like that
that
too.
could be I do
Yeah.
like one thing that I will say about Terminator 2 is it is like it's clearly in the action genre. There's a little bit of
Yeah.
dystopian, but it's clearly in the action genre where Terminator 1 does a
It's more like mystery and slasher and
it combines
horror.
genres in a much more in a very interesting way, which is
Yeah.
part of the fun of Terminator 1.
The only thing that we don't see much of in Terminator 1 is comedy, I think.
Yeah,
There's a little bit there, but not a whole lot.
yeah. Terminator 2 has a few light moments, a few.
Okay,
Um,
so this debate will not be settled. Basically,
no,
like if
and
we're going to give it a
really,
rating,
listeners, just
Terminator
pick,
1 and
watch them
yeah,
both and pick your own. You know,
it's like saying that Terminator 1 in my case anyway, Terminator 1 is a 9 out of 10 and Terminator 2 is an 8.5 out of 10. I mean they're both great movies.
yeah.